The silence that followed Alina's whispered declaration was more explosive than any weapon. Zarntok Ambassador Kthax's translucent membrane rippled with confusion, its multiple eyes blinking in rapid succession, a telltale sign of diplomatic distress. Dr. Rodriguez, the ambassador's resonant voice carried a mixture of condescension and warning. You are dangerously close to violating Confederation Protocol 7 Gamma. Your emotional outburst. Before Kthax could finish, Alina activated her neural link. Holographic data streams erupted around the chamber, each projection a damning piece of evidence. Colony massacre reports, diplomatic correspondence, secret trade agreements that systematically undermined human settlements, all lay bare in excruciating detail. The chamber's environmental controls seemed to shift, the temperature dropping several degrees. Other species shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Humans, typically known for their calm diplomacy, had never presented information with such surgical precision. A holographic recording flickered to life. Footage from the New Phoenix colony's final moments. Civilian evacuation ships being systematically targeted. Rescue shuttles picked off one by Zarntok military vessels. The audio was particularly haunting. Children's screams, desperate communication attempts, the final moments of a settlement that had existed for barely 2 generations. These are not isolated incidents, Alina continued, her voice devoid of the emotional tremor from moments before. This is systematic elimination, and we have documentation proving it is not just the Zarntok, but a coordinated effort involving multiple Confederation members. The room's holographic display expanded, showing intricate network maps of diplomatic and military connections. Red lines connected various alien species, revealing a complex web of exploitation that had been hidden in plain sight for decades. Ambassador Kthax's membrane turned a sickly shade of gray, the Zarntok equivalent of turning pale. These are selective interpretations, the diplomat stammered. Selective. Alina's laugh was sharp enough to cut through the chamber's tension. We have complete communication logs. Unredacted. Full context. With a gesture, Alina uploaded the complete dataset to the Confederation's main servers. Firewalls that had protected these secrets for generations collapsed instantly. Decades of carefully maintained diplomatic facades began to crumble in real time. Behind her, a contingent of human delegates stood in perfect, synchronized silence. They were not just diplomats, but a cross-section of human society. Military strategists, colony administrators, scientific researchers, and civilian representatives. Their presence was a statement. This was no individual's outburst, but a collective decision. Dr. Marcus Chen, head of the Interstellar Colonial Reconstruction Board, stepped forward. Unlike Alina's calculated precision, Chen radiated a controlled fury. We have recorded over 427 systematic violations of the Galactic Mutual Protection Accords. Not by accident, not by misunderstanding, by deliberate, calculated design. The chamber's holographic systems began displaying personal stories, not just statistics. Individual faces of colonists lost, families destroyed, dreams extinguished. Each image was an indictment, a human life reduced to a data point in a larger, more sinister calculation. Kthax attempted to interrupt, but the neural link protocols had already locked the ambassador's communication channels. No more interruptions would be tolerated. Alina's final presentation was perhaps the most devastating. A comprehensive economic analysis revealed how human colonies had been systematically positioned in resource-rich areas, only to be repeatedly destabilized, not through open warfare, which would violate numerous treaties, but through a death by 1,000 diplomatic cuts. We are done being polite, Alina stated. It was not a threat. It was not a promise. It was a declarative statement of fact. As she spoke, something fundamental shifted in the chamber. The other species could feel it. A change more profound than any diplomatic resolution. Humanity was no longer asking for a seat at the table. They were redesigning the entire room. The Confederation's oldest members exchanged nervous glances, They had long viewed humans as idealistic, perpetually hopeful, willing to compromise. Those assumptions were about to be violently, comprehensively dismantled. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the epicenter of this seismic diplomatic event, her torn credentials still scattered at her feet. A simple reminder that some things, once broken, cannot be repaired through traditional means. The universe was about to learn exactly what happens when humanity decides to stop being kind. The Global Human Assembly wasn't held in a traditional conference center. Instead, it materialized across a distributed network of quantum-linked environments, each space a perfect holographic representation of locations that held deep significance to human resilience. Maya Chen's primary projection appeared in the ruins of the New Phoenix colony, the very settlement that had been almost completely destroyed. Twisted metal and frozen atmospheric dust formed a haunting backdrop to her presentation. Around her, holographic representations of human leaders from every corner of human-controlled space flickered into existence. "We are not just responding to aggression," Maya began, her voice cutting through the ambient static of the damaged colony. "We are rewriting the fundamental equation of our survival." A series of data visualizations erupted around her. Each one told a story of systematic undermining. Economic models showing how human colonies were strategically positioned to be vulnerable. Communication networks revealing deliberate information suppression. Resource allocation patterns that demonstrated a calculated approach to maintaining human settlements in a perpetual state of reactive survival. In the orbital research station above Mars, Dr. Alejandro Ramirez, head of Advanced Technological Integration, was simultaneously presenting a different aspect of the same narrative. His environment was a sterile laboratory, filled with prototype technologies that had been deliberately held back by previous diplomatic constraints. "Kindness is not our weakness," Ramirez explained, manipulating holographic representations of quantum computing arrays and nanofabrication systems. "It has been our most sophisticated camouflage." The technologies he revealed were nothing short of revolutionary. Quantum entanglement communication systems that could bypass any known interception technology. Nano-adaptive materials that could reconfigure themselves at the molecular level. Energy generation systems that made current galactic power sources look like primitive campfires. What made these technologies truly terrifying was not their potential for destruction, but their potential for absolute control. These were not weapons in the traditional sense. They were total systems of technological superiority. Back on Earth, in the reconstructed United Nations complex, General Rachel Okoye presented the military perspective. Her projection was surrounded by historical battle simulations, each one demonstrating how human military strategy had been systematically constrained by diplomatic agreements. "We have not been peaceful," Okoye stated bluntly. "We have been patient. There is a difference." The simulation showed multiple scenarios where human military capabilities could have decisively ended conflicts. Instead, diplomatic channels had always intervened, forcing compromise that ultimately benefited other species at humanity's expense. Each presentation was a piece of a larger puzzle. Maya's economic analysis, Ramirez's technological revelations, Okoye's strategic insights. They were not just presenting a response to aggression. They were outlining a comprehensive redesign of human interaction with the galaxy. The quantum network linking these presentations began to pulse with a unique signature. It wasn't just a communication protocol. It was a living, adaptive system that was learning and evolving in real time. Each human leader's presentation was not just being shared. It was being integrated into a collective consciousness. "We are done explaining," Maya concluded, her voice resonating across multiple projection environments. "From this moment forward, we define the terms of our existence." The final visualization was both beautiful and terrifying. A dynamic model of human potential, no longer constrained by external limitations. Every suppressed innovation, every delayed technological breakthrough, every compromised colonization effort, now unleashed simultaneously. In orbital research stations, planetary laboratories, and hidden facilities across human-controlled space, something fundamental shifted. Generations of researchers who had been told to slow down, to compromise, to wait, were now being given total authorization to pursue every theoretical possibility. The manifesto wasn't just a declaration of intent. It was a complete systems reset. As the global assembly concluded, a strange calm descended. This was not anger. This was not revenge. This was a calculated, comprehensive transformation. The galaxy had approximately 72 hours to prepare for what was coming. Humanity was done being kind. The Atacama Desert Facility wasn't just a research center. It was a quantum crucible of human potential, a place where the impossible was about to become routine. Dr. Kamil Nowak watched as the first quantum-adaptive nanoswarm initialized. Unlike previous research efforts, this wasn't a controlled experiment. It was a deliberate unleashing of technological potential. The nanoswarm looked like liquid mercury at first, then transformed, splitting into microscopic components that could reconfigure themselves with impossible speed and precision. Adaptive intelligence meets material science, Nowak muttered to himself, without ethical constraints. The facility itself was a marvel of camouflage and technological integration. From the outside, it appeared to be nothing more than a series of solar collection arrays and geological research stations. Underground, it was a labyrinth of quantum computing centers, nanofabrication labs, and research environments that defied conventional scientific understanding. In the central control room, holographic displays tracked multiple simultaneous breakthrough projects. Each one represented a technology that had been previously shelved due to potential ethical concerns or diplomatic sensitivities. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's earlier speech had been more than a diplomatic breakdown. It was a complete removal of the invisible chains that had constrained human innovation. A project team led by Dr. Hiroko Tanaka was working on quantum entanglement communication systems that could bypass any known interception technology. Their breakthrough wasn't just about faster communication. It was about creating a communication network that was fundamentally unpredictable and unbreakable. Traditional encryption is linear, Tanaka explained to her team. We're creating a communication method that exists in multiple quantum states simultaneously. It's not just secure, it's fundamentally unknowable. In another section of the facility, a team of material scientists worked on adaptive nanomaterials that could reconfigure themselves at the molecular level. What started as a simple alloy could transform into a complex computational system, a structural support, or a defensive barrier, all within milliseconds. Dr. Marcus Chen, who had been part of the initial diplomatic confrontation, now oversaw the technological acceleration. His background in colonial reconstruction gave him a unique perspective. These weren't just technological breakthroughs. They were survival mechanisms. We're not developing weapons, Chen would explain to his team. We're developing adaptive solutions to systemic threats. The facility's power source was itself a breakthrough. A compact fusion reactor that used a quantum-catalyzed deuterium extraction process generated more energy than entire planetary power grids. It was silent, clean, and could be scaled from a device the size of a coffee mug to a city-wide power generation system. But the most significant development was happening in a seemingly innocuous research wing. A team led by Dr. Aisha Okonkwo was working on something far more profound than traditional technological development. They were developing an adaptive artificial intelligence system that didn't just process information. It learned, predicted, and strategized with a level of complexity that bordered on sentience. Traditional AI follows programming, Okonkwo explained during a rare briefing. Our system doesn't just follow rules. It understands context, predicts potential outcomes, and develops strategies that go beyond linear thinking. The AI they were developing wasn't just a tool. It was a collaborative intelligence that could integrate human creativity with computational precision. As the days passed, the facility's output began to accelerate exponentially. What would have taken decades of research was now being developed in weeks. The quantum computing systems were not just processing information. They were creating new research pathways, identifying potential breakthrough areas faster than human researchers could comprehend. Outside the facility, the world continued as normal. Diplomatic channels remained relatively quiet. The Galactic Confederation had not yet fully comprehended the magnitude of what was happening. They were about to find out. In the central control room, a countdown began. Not to destruction, not to war, but to a fundamental transformation of what was possible. Humanity was recalibrating its approach to survival, and the universe was about to receive its first demonstration. Captain Aria Rodriguez, no relation to Elena Rodriguez, but carrying the same steel in her eyes, stood on the bridge of the U.S. Retribution. The ship was unlike any vessel in human or alien history. Its hull wasn't just a protective shell, but a living, adaptive system that could reconfigure itself in milliseconds. Target acquisition confirmed, her neural interface announced. The voice was neither mechanical nor fully human, a hybrid intelligence that integrated human intuition with computational precision. The Zarntok home system appeared on the holographic display. Multiple defense platforms, considered impenetrable by galactic standards, looked like children's building blocks from the Retribution's perspective. Each platform represented centuries of technological development, a testament to the Zarntok's reputation as master defensive strategists. They would soon learn the meaning of obsolescence. Captain Rodriguez didn't move, didn't give a verbal command. Her neural link was already 3 steps ahead of traditional combat protocols. The ship responded to her cognitive patterns, interpreting intent before it could be verbalized. The first wave of infiltration was silent. Quantum-entangled nanoprobes, smaller than a human blood cell, began penetrating the Zarntok defense grid. They weren't attacking. They were mapping, learning, understanding every microscopic vulnerability in real time. Dr. Marcus Chen's voice came through a secure communication channel. Remember, this is a demonstration, not an extinction event. The nanoprobes began their work. They didn't destroy systems. They rewrote them. Defensive algorithms that had taken generations to develop were being rewritten, redirected, neutralized. Not through brute force, but through a level of computational judo that made their previous defenses look like primitive code. Zarntok communication networks started to fragment. Emergency protocols triggered, but each response was anticipated, neutralized before it could fully initialize. It was like watching a complex chess match where one player could change the board's rules with each move. On the Zarntok primary communication hub, screens flickered with impossible data streams. Military commanders watched in growing horror as their most secure systems began to dissolve. Not through destruction, but through a form of technological comprehension that rendered their defenses meaningless. "They're not breaking our systems," a Zarntok communications officer whispered in terror. "They're understanding them completely." The U.S. Retribution hadn't fired a single conventional weapon. It didn't need to. Its very existence was a weapon of total systemic comprehension. Quantum-adaptive electromagnetic pulses began to spread through the Zarntok defense grid. These weren't traditional EMP bursts. They were intelligent waves that could differentiate between critical infrastructure and non-essential systems. Hospitals remained operational. Communication networks for civilian use stayed intact. Only military and defensive systems found themselves systematically neutralized. Captain Rodriguez's neural interface provided a constant stream of information, not just tactical data, but a comprehensive understanding of the entire systemic interaction. She could see the Zarntok defense grid not as a series of platforms, but as a living, interconnected organism, and she was surgically dismantling its nervous system. 15 minutes into the operation, the Zarntok home system was completely neutralized. No casualties, no physical destruction, just a complete technological shutdown. The transmission was brutally simple. No more negotiations, no more mercy. In the Galactic Confederation's emergency chambers, representatives from multiple species watched the transmission in stunned silence. This wasn't an act of war. This was a complete redefinition of warfare itself. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, watching from Earth, allowed herself the smallest of smiles. This was precisely why humanity had been underestimated for so long. They didn't just think outside the box. They redesigned the entire concept of the box. The Zarntok would be the first, but they would not be the last to understand this new reality. Humanity had entered a new phase of existence, and the universe was about to be reminded why humans were not just another species. They were a force of strategic technological evolution. The fracturing began in unexpected places. On Nexus Prime, the central communication hub of the Galactic Confederation, data streams became a chaotic storm of conflicting information. Diplomatic encryption protocols that had stood for centuries began to unravel like cheap fabric, revealing layers of manipulation that had been carefully hidden for generations. Ambassador Krulax of the Valerian cluster was the first to break protocol. Instead of the measured diplomatic response expected, he simply laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that echoed through the emergency chamber. "We created this," Krulax announced, his multifaceted eyes reflecting a complex mixture of terror and reluctant admiration. "We taught them to be exactly this." The holographic displays began to show a cascading effect. Every treaty, every diplomatic agreement, every carefully constructed interspecies relationship was being systematically dismantled, not through violence, but through pure, unadulterated information. Dr. Lyra Centura, a xenoanthropologist who had spent her entire career studying human adaptation, watched the unfolding chaos with a clinical eye. Her latest research paper, Human Resilience as a Systemic Evolutionary Strategy, was now looking like a prophetic text rather than an academic exercise. They didn't just develop technology, she muttered into her personal recording device. They developed a completely new approach to existence. The Confederation's communication networks began to splinter, not through external attack, but through an internal recognition of systemic failure. Species that had long maintained delicate political balances now found themselves exposed, their intricate webs of influence suddenly transparent. On the methane seas of Craxus Prime, a group of elder diplomats watched their carefully constructed trade agreements dissolve in real time. Generations of subtle manipulation, redirecting human colonial expansion, controlling resource allocations, maintaining a perpetual state of diplomatic tension, were now laid bare. "We treated them like children," one elder whispered, "and they were playing a game we didn't even understand existed." The human approach was ruthlessly elegant. They weren't destroying systems, they were revealing them. Every hidden communication channel, every suppressed diplomatic communication, every manipulative trade agreement was being brought into the light. Quantum encrypted data streams began to flow freely, not just from human sources, but from countless hidden archives that had been waiting for this moment. It was as if humanity had been collecting receipts for generations, waiting for the perfect moment to present the bill. Dr. Marcus Chen's earlier work on colonial reconstruction took on a new meaning. What had seemed like bureaucratic documentation was now revealed as a comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation that spanned decades. The Confederation's emergency protocols began to trigger, but each response was already anticipated. Human adaptive intelligence systems were several moves ahead, neutralizing potential countermeasures before they could fully initialize. On Earth, in the distributed command centers, no one was celebrating. This wasn't about victory. This was about systemic reset. "We are not seeking destruction," Elena Rodriguez's earlier statement kept echoing through diplomatic channels. "We are seeking understanding." But it was an understanding on humanity's terms. Species that had long considered humans as naive peacekeepers were now confronting a fundamental misconception. The diplomatic softness had not been weakness. It had been the most sophisticated form of intelligence gathering in galactic history. The Valerian ambassador's earlier laugh continued to resonate. It was a sound of recognition, of respect, of terror. Diplomatic maps began to redraw themselves, not through conflict, but through pure, unadulterated information. Centuries of carefully maintained illusions were dissolving, revealing the complex power structures that had existed just beneath the surface. Humanity had not just changed the game. They had revealed that there was never a game to begin with, only a complex system of manipulation that they were now comprehensively dismantling. The universe watched, holding its collective breath. Something fundamental was shifting, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Humanity Protocol wasn't a document. It was a living system. Dr. Arya Nakamura stood in the central drafting chamber, surrounded by holographic projections that shifted and recalibrated in real time. Unlike traditional legal frameworks, this protocol was an adaptive intelligence, a set of guidelines that could learn, modify, and respond to complex interstellar dynamics with unprecedented precision. "We're not creating laws," she explained to her team of legal theorists, sinopolitical experts, and quantum systems designers. "We're creating a comprehensive immune system for galactic interaction." The first iteration manifested as a multidimensional framework that defied traditional understanding of diplomatic governance. It wasn't just a set of rules. It was a predictive, adaptive network that could anticipate potential conflicts before they could fully form. Each clause was a quantum entanglement of legal, economic, and strategic considerations. Where traditional treaties would require pages of text, the Humanity Protocol compressed entire diplomatic relationships into elegant, almost mathematical constructs. Dr. Joaquin Ramirez, a specialist in interspecies economic systems, demonstrated one of the protocol's core mechanisms. A holographic display showed how resource allocation, technological exchange, and colonial development could be regulated through a system that was simultaneously transparent and impenetrable. "Watch," Ramirez said, manipulating the display. A simulated attempt by an alien species to manipulate resource distributions triggered an immediate multilayered response. Not a punitive action, but a comprehensive recalibration that made the attempted manipulation economically impossible. The system didn't just block the action. It rendered the very concept of such manipulation nonsensical. In the Confederation's emergency chambers, diplomatic representatives began to understand the true nature of what humanity had created. This wasn't a set of rules. It was a completely new approach to interspecies interaction. The protocol had several key innovations that made traditional diplomatic mechanisms look primitive. Predictive conflict resolution. Using advanced quantum modeling, the system could identify potential conflicts generations before they could manifest, providing comprehensive mitigation strategies. Adaptive consequence mechanisms. Punitive actions were not fixed penalties, but dynamic responses that could be precisely calibrated to specific violations. Transparent intelligence. Every aspect of the protocol was simultaneously accessible and incomprehensible to those not operating within its framework. Dr. Elena Rodriguez oversaw the final integration. She understood that this was more than a diplomatic tool. It was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent species could interact. "We are not seeking to control," she had stated during the initial drafting. "We are seeking to create a framework of mutual understanding that makes conflict fundamentally unnecessary." The first test came from an unexpected source. The Craxus Collective, known for their complex trade manipulations, attempted to probe the protocol's boundaries. Their most sophisticated economic warfare strategies were neutralized before they could fully initialize. But the response wasn't a destruction of their economic systems. Instead, the protocol provided a comprehensive restructuring that made their previous strategies not just ineffective, but logically impossible. "It's like they've created a diplomatic quantum computer," one Craxus elder observed, a mixture of terror and grudging respect in their voice. The most radical aspect was the protocol's learning capability. Each interaction, each attempted violation, each diplomatic exchange became part of its core intelligence. It was evolving faster than any biological or artificial intelligence could comprehend. Dr. Nakamura's team worked in shifts that defied traditional human limitations. They weren't just drafting a protocol. They were giving birth to a new form of interstellar intelligence. As the first full implementation began, the universe watched. This wasn't just a human diplomatic innovation. This was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent species could coexist. The Humanity Protocol wasn't a constraint. It was an invitation to a more sophisticated form of existence. And the universe was about to receive its first comprehensive lesson. The first signs of transformation emerged in the most unexpected places. On the methane-rich world of Lyra Prime, a joint research station became the unexpected crucible of this new galactic paradigm. Dr. Serena Okoro, a human xenobiologist, found herself working alongside researchers from species that had previously viewed humanity with suspicion. "It's not about cooperation," she explained to her Valerian research partner, Krelvax. "It's about mutual survival." Their research focused on adaptive ecosystem restoration, a field that had been stagnant for generations. Under the new Humanity Protocol, resources that were once hoarded were now freely exchanged, not through naive altruism, but through a sophisticated understanding that collective advancement served everyone's interests. The research station became a microcosm of the larger transformation. Species that had been traditional rivals now found themselves solving complex problems together. The threat was no longer external conflict, but the potential of collective stagnation. In the orbital markets of Nexus Prime, economic systems underwent a radical shift. Trade was no longer a zero-sum game of exploitation, but a complex network of mutual development. Traders from different species discovered that the new protocols made predatory practices not just unethical, but mathematically impossible. Zara Chen, a third-generation colonial economic strategist, monitored these changes from a distributed research center. Her team's predictive models showed something unprecedented: a galactic ecosystem that was growing more stable with each passing moment. "We're not creating peace," Chen would often say. "We're creating a system where conflict becomes increasingly nonsensical." On the desert world of Craxus, a diplomatic summit revealed the depth of this transformation. Representatives from species that had been at odds for generations now found themselves solving problems with a level of efficiency that would have been unimaginable before. The Valerian ambassador, once a master of complex diplomatic manipulation, now found himself in a role he had never anticipated. "We are learning," he told his colleagues, "that strength is not about domination. It's about comprehensive understanding." This was not a forced peace. It was a fundamental restructuring of how intelligent species could interact. Quantum communication networks began to reveal something profound. The adaptive intelligence of the Humanity Protocol was creating communication channels that transcended traditional linguistic and cultural barriers. Ideas could now be exchanged with a level of nuance and precision that made previous diplomatic efforts look like crude shouting matches. Dr. Marcus Chen's earlier work on colonial reconstruction took on a new meaning. What had seemed like bureaucratic documentation was now revealed as the foundation of a new form of interstellar cooperation. Research stations across multiple star systems began to show remarkable results. Collaborative projects that had been stalled for generations were now moving at unprecedented speeds. The removal of artificial barriers, political, economic, technological, unleashed a wave of innovation that defied previous understanding. On Earth, in the distributed command centers, no one was celebrating individual victories. This was about something far more profound: a systemic reset of galactic potential. The most surprising aspect was the voluntary nature of this transformation. Species were not being forced into cooperation. They were choosing it, recognizing that the alternative was increasingly unattractive. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched these developments with a complex mixture of emotions. This was not about human supremacy. This was about creating a framework where every species could truly develop its potential. "We are not the masters," she had stated during the initial implementation of the protocol. "We are the architects of a more sophisticated form of existence." The universe was listening. Technological exchanges that had been previously unimaginable became routine. A research team from the methane worlds could now easily collaborate with crystalline intelligence networks from the far rim of explored space. The barriers were not just coming down. They were being redesigned at a fundamental level. As the first full cycle of the new paradigm completed, something became clear. This was not about human dominance. This was about collective evolution. The universe had changed, and it was just beginning to understand how. Time became a different concept entirely. 5 years after the initial transformation, humanity was no longer recognizable as the species that had once been considered naive diplomats. They weren't conquerors. They weren't saviors. They were something far more complex, architects of a new form of galactic existence. The Nexus Confluence, an unprecedented gathering of species from across explored space, marked a moment of collective reflection. Delegates from over 247 distinct civilizations gathered in a massive spherical structure that defied traditional architectural principles. Its very design was a testament to the new paradigm: adaptive, responsive, capable of instantaneous reconfiguration. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center, not as a leader, but as a witness. Her granddaughter, Aria Rodriguez Kim, represented a generation born into this new reality. Unlike previous diplomatic figures, she moved between species with a fluidity that would have been impossible before. Her neural interfaces allowed her to communicate simultaneously in multiple linguistic and conceptual frameworks. "We didn't change the universe," Aria explained during her keynote address. "We changed how the universe understands itself." The transformation wasn't just technological or diplomatic. It was fundamentally existential. Quantum communication networks had evolved into something that blurred the lines between individual consciousness and collective intelligence. Research stations became living networks of collaborative thought, where the boundaries between species dissolved into pure adaptive knowledge creation. On the crystalline research world of Luminara, a joint expedition uncovered archaeological evidence that suggested this transformation had been inevitable. Ancient artifacts revealed that multiple species had been independently moving toward this moment of collective evolution. Humanity hadn't initiated the change. They had simply provided the catalyst. Dr. Marcus Chen's comprehensive historical analysis, now considered a foundational text across multiple civilizations, revealed a profound insight. The human capacity for empathy, long misunderstood as weakness, was actually the most sophisticated form of strategic intelligence. Kindness was never about submission, Chen's holographic lectures explained. It was always about comprehensive understanding. The economic systems that emerged defied previous capitalist or socialist models. Resources flowed like living systems, adapting to needs with a level of precision that made previous economic theories look like primitive guesswork. Zara Chen, now leading the Interstellar Economic Dynamics Institute, demonstrated how these new systems worked. Holographic displays showed resource allocation that was simultaneously global and hyper-localized, responding to needs before they could fully manifest. Military structures transformed completely. Defense became a collaborative network of predictive intelligence, where potential conflicts were resolved through comprehensive understanding rather than physical confrontation. General Rachel Okoye, now heading the Interspecies Collaborative Defense Initiative, explained it simply: "We don't prevent wars. We make wars fundamentally unnecessary." The most profound changes happened at the individual level. Neural interface technologies allowed for levels of communication that transcended traditional linguistic and cultural barriers. A researcher on one side of the galaxy could instantly share not just information, but lived experience with colleagues across multiple star systems. Dr. Lyra Centura's predictive models, once considered radical, were now fundamental to understanding this new form of existence. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had provided a framework for collective evolution. On Earth, the facility in the Atacama Desert had transformed. No longer a secret research center, it was now an open collaborative space where researchers from across the galaxy worked on challenges that defied previous understanding. Elena Rodriguez, now in her late 70s, watched these developments with a sense of profound humility. This was not about human victory. This was about something far more significant. As the Nexus Confluence concluded, a collective realization emerged. The universe was not a place of competition, but of interconnected potential. Humanity's greatest achievement was not technological superiority. It was the ability to recognize that true strength lies in comprehensive understanding. The universe had shifted, and it would never be the same again.